Well, let me tell you, people, it's a natural fact. No two men understand the Bible alike, and that's all. That's all. And you gotta have Jesus, that's all. The denominations have no right to fight. Think they ought to get on the treat each other right, and that's all. That's all. And you gotta have Jesus, that's all. Right to stand together, wrong to stand apart. None shall enter heaven but the pure in heart, and that's all. That's all. And you gotta have Jesus, that's all.
Well, it's true. You gotta have Jesus, and that's all. But it's sort of like having a steak. All you need is the steak. But if someone gives you a baked potato with it, you're gonna eat it. And so pretend that we're just a perfectly cooked and foil baked potato of a podcast tonight. I'll be the sour cream. Chortles, you can be the bacon bits.
Good, I'm eating low carb.
Let's say some smoked pork belly bits. Nate,
I have a belly.
I don't know. What do we want? What do we want Nate to be? We can. Should he be the cheese?
Well, he would have to be the Taco Bell fire sauce.
He has to be the cheese, given current residences.
Most of you aren't old enough to know it, but Nate launched an epic Twitter-breaking thread. His tweet was, "Well, let's just unmute. I'm going to unmute you, Nate, and you just say the tweet, say the line."
Taco Bell fire sauce is a legitimate hot sauce.
I think it was legitimately good. I hate to correct you after all these years.
Legitimately good.
Yeah, I no longer agree with that statement since I've become a hot sauce expert. But it was great. It was great fun. It was when Twitter was fun, and everyone didn't hate each other. And I don't know, Dr. Hart. Maybe except for you, there weren't many scholars on Twitter back then, and it was a better place. So let me unmute you, welcome you and the cat. I think we should name the cat Technical Difficulties because we always have them when you come on.
Hello, all. This is our new cat, Jesse. Our old cat, Dealey, who used to make an appearance. Cordelia, she died back in May, unfortunately, but we got little Jesse out.
I promoted the show that I said that you were America's most beloved church historian, and I hope you told your wife that. So, have you been feeling the love online lately?
No, I haven't actually.
We actually knew that. So you have a new book, and that's what we're going to talk about. But we're liable to talk about many other things as well. Now, we go way back with Nate. I think it's been a few years. Nate is, when I first met you, Nate, online, you were a student at Westminster Seminary, California, and now you've put several years in laboring in the Orthodox Presbyterian trenches, have you not? Oh, you got to unmute.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, up in Wisconsin for the past 3.5 years now. So
A super easy place to be a Presbyterian, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, we've got some roots here, but Madison is, they just released a graphic for the election of the latest Supreme Court judge for the state Supreme Court, and it was all blue for Madison, every precinct, all blue. So that's what we're living in here.
I thought you were going to tell me that the new Supreme Court justice for Wisconsin had 3 pronouns, not just, with all their conjugate, whatever you call them, declensions or conjugations or whatever they are.
Yeah. The never-ending list of pronouns.
Are you in the same presbytery as Dr. Hart?
I am not, no.
Okay, I didn't think so.
No.
And Dr. Hart is in Hillsdale for now, but you have retirement looming.
Yes, in a year, God willing, or so. Yeah. Back to Philadelphia.
Well, we hope it's in good shape when you get there. So, Presby, any updates from you? You've been gone for off and on a couple of every other show you haven't made it. So, what's up with you?
Oh, we're trying to find new promised lands, pilgrims, sojourners, things of that nature. I think we've settled a lot of our a lot of our text messages about new restaurants to try out and whatnot. But we're still in Carolina. Um, just the prefix might be different. So
So,
um,
you've moved to one of the most probably the most Presbyterian state in the United States. It probably used to be Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but now it could be South Carolina.
I think you might be right. It's a dangerous thing that me and Ben Glasser are only about a 40-minute drive away from each other. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Well, see, have you alerted? Have you got a new parole officer? You checked in with the state authorities? Any of that stuff?
Yeah, I have. They've been very accommodating. I had an issue with my last anklet. It kind of flared up a skin irritation, but as with all things, they've made some great strides in in-home monitoring hardware, and so this one is hypoallergenic, and about every 6 to 8 hours releases a calming lavender scent that's pleasing to all in the house.
I've heard there's a good chance that if you don't check in regularly with your ecclesial parole officer down there, that they'll sentence you to be Nancy Mace's pool boy. Is there any chance of that?
Yeah, I've heard rumors of it. At some of the meetings, you can tell how much truth there is based on the long stares of whoever the last person is to the meeting. Usually, if there's a faint waft of Clorox or chlorine in the air, it was treatment day at the pool, and you know, discolored Crocs or things like that are usually a telltale sign.
Yeah. Well, we'll hope it all works out. Well, what's worked out for our guest, Dr. Daryl Hart, OPC ruling elder, not currently serving, but long service as a ruling elder, denominational committee member, delegate to the General Assembly, and teacher and librarian at various seminaries, but now professor of American history, I believe it is, at or some sort of history at Hillsdale. And he has published yet another book, and he usually has a fancy publisher. And this time we have to ask, Notre Dame. What has that? I'll unmute you. What has that been like, being a Notre Dame University Press author?
It's been fine. I have a friendship with the director of the press, who used to be at Roman and Littlefield when I published Lost Soul of American Protestantism. And then he went to Kentucky, and then he wound up at Notre Dame, and I've actually been very impressed with the staff there and the editing, and so I have nothing to complain about. It is seemingly maybe unusual for a Roman Catholic University press to publish a book on Presbyterian history, but Roman Catholic University presses are like other university presses. They're trying to publish in all sorts of fields. And I actually co-edited a series there on religion and civil society that Dan Williams wrote the first title in the series on Roe v. Wade and the history of Roe v. Wade and its history of abortion and abortion law and rights. So Notre Dame is trying to be to boost its game, to move up in the ranks of university presses. I'm not sure I'm going to help them do that, but I was glad to be able to publish with them.
Well, here I've got a theory.
So, like their football team, are you a publishee without a conference now at this point?
You could say that, but don't forget that Ara Parsegian, the great coach in the 60s, was a Presbyterian.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I remember the name. So I've got a theory for why they might have published you. Secretly, they want Roman Catholic integralists to take over the U.S., and they want you to demoralize the Presbyterians. Someone will probably tweet that tomorrow. That's the quality of conspiracy theory that you find online these days. So you might watch out for that. Could happen. So the book is Protestants and Patriots, subtitle Presbyterians in the Age of Revolution, and that basically just means, post Reformation. And it's not the cheapest book that ever was, but I'm sure it's nicely done. You probably would get it from Amazon. It's going to be more convenient, but you could buy it straight from the Roman Catholics if you wanted to, or many other places, I'm sure. And this is the kind of book that'll probably go on sale at some point, but probably not anytime soon. I was reading, of course, one of my pastors got a review copy, and it's uncorrected, and he loaned it to me. I have not read the book. I didn't have time, but I've looked through it, and I love the uncorrected. Yes, advanced uncorrected page proof. It's not even a book; it's a page proof. And but I thought of a better title for the book that you should. That of course you don't get to pick the. I'm not sure they people think people who write newspaper stories don't write the headlines, and often authors don't write the title of the book, although you may from time to time. But I think this should have been called Presbyterian's Progress.
Okay, I sort of get it.
So anyway, we'll maybe talk about that later. So I don't think we've ever talked to you about a specific book before. What's the genesis of this book? What was the impetus for it, and how long have you been working on it?
So I have a good friend in Belfast, Northern Ireland, who used to be at Trinity College, Dublin, and I went over there in 2012, and was talking to him, Crawford Gribben, and one of his colleagues there, Graham Murdoch, and I just started thinking about a series that they were editing at the time, and this book has gone to a different series, but or a different press. But at Hillsdale, you teach in the history department. Everyone teaches either both Western Heritage and American Heritage, and Western Heritage runs from Hammurabi down to John Locke, and you get to see the big picture. And one of the texts that is actually we assign in our reader, I didn't have anything to do with the choice of this, but we actually students read Calvin's Ecclesiastical Ordinances, which a decade ago didn't maybe seem all that unusual to me. But the more that I think about it, the more unusual it seems, because Presbyterian polity really was an innovation, at least for the late early church through the medieval and early modern churches. Episcopacy was the church polity default for the church after the conversion of Constantine. And
it makes sense with monarchy, right? I mean, a lot of times civil whatever the civil government is will be reflected in the church government.
Right. But Calvin, he was in Geneva when he wrote those ordinances, and he probably got his ideas somewhat from Martin Bucer in Strasbourg. And because I don't read European languages, there's probably a whole body of literature on maybe the origins of Presbyterian polity among the first generation reformers. But the more I began to think about how unusual Presbyterian polity was, and then the more I began to look at the way that Presbyterianism played out in England and Scotland beginning around 1560 and beyond, especially because the English and Scottish exiles, among them John Knox, who had to leave the Isles because of persecution under Mary Tudor, also known as Bloody Mary, and went to Geneva and were gobsmacked by what a godly society it was. And they came back and wanted to implement Presbyterian polity both in England and in Scotland. There was one big hitch to that, though. It was the monarchy. And especially in England with the English Reformation, Parliament had made Henry VIII, but also all subsequent kings or queens, the head of the Church of England, because prior to that it was the Pope who had been the head of the church. So now it's the king or the queen who's the head of the church. And for Presbyterians, that is fighting words, because of course there's only one head of the church, and that's Jesus Christ. And therefore, that's one little window into the way in which Presbyterian polity, church government, was actually politically disruptive. It was a dissenting movement. It was constant. Presbyterians were constantly complaining about the nature of the church, but also about royal supremacy over the church. And between 1560 and 1700, Presbyterians are a constant pain in the neck for the elite officials in both England and Scotland. And what this means, in some ways what it means, and what I began to think about a decade or so ago was, okay, lots of people have tried to explain the American Revolution as a Presbyterian revolution. And why is it that so many Presbyterians supported it, or Calvinists in New England? And lots of people have gone to explanations revolving around resistance theory. That is, the theories about when it is okay to resist or rebel against a tyrant. And there's a long body of literature in the medieval church and even into the early modern period, Roman Catholic, Protestant, Lutheran, and Reformed. This isn't necessarily an unusual position. What is unusual, though, is for Presbyterians to come along with this form of church government that is especially combative in the context of British politics, England and Scotland, where in England you have the monarch as the head of the church. And that just sets off sparks.
All right, so your first section of the book is called Presbyterians Aggressive, and that's the period 1560 to 1700. So, was there some cognitive dissonance where the Scots were asking for the magistrate to have power, but then they didn't want the magistrate to have that power over them?
No, not really.
Principally they thought. If you read I don't know where they were at this point, but by the time they wrote the Westminster Confession, they gave the magistrate a lot of power in some respects. And did they live to regret that, did they forget about what had happened from 1560 to 1660?
Well, I don't like the word complicated because I think it gets overused, but it may work in this case. What makes British politics messy on several levels is, one, you have the English monarchy and the Scottish monarchy, which then come together in 1603 when James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England, also known for the King James Bible. That's the King James. And that means that Presbyterians who have been trying to get the king in Scotland, and the Presbyterian reforms of the Church of Scotland went much farther than the Presbyterians ever could try in England. So they actually had a covenant, the so-called national covenant with James VI in 1581, which pledged the crown, parliament, the church, and the people to maintain and advocate the true religion, which was Presbyterianism, and also to oppose the false religion, which was Roman Catholicism. And then that covenant between church, people, parliament, and king becomes the linchpin of Scottish Presbyterians, hence the Covenanters, who eventually, Covenanters come up with the National Covenant of 1638, which is basically a redo of the King's Confession or the National Covenant of 1581. And then England also gets on the covenant bandwagon in 1643 with the Solemn League and Covenant. And at that point, you have one crown for two realms, England and Scotland. They eventually will unite and become the United Kingdom in 1707. But so Presbyterians, have their own arrangement in Scotland. Presbyterians in England are never really as successful. And, they're not always on the same page, but sometimes they are on the same page, such as at the Westminster Assembly, where you have Scottish commissioners. But it's the Scots who are much more politically motivated, politically self-aware because of the covenanting tradition. And the English sort of get swept up in that by virtue of James' son, Charles I, who tries to force the Book of Common Prayer on the Scottish Church, and that leads to, of all things, these little minor skirmishes called the Bishops' War, which break out in 1639 and 1640 and lead to feed into the Civil War between the English Parliament and Charles in the 1640s, which is the backdrop of all things for the Westminster Assembly. And, Americans maybe can relate to this because we kind of celebrate and love the Declaration of Independence, which is occurring in this war with the British Empire in the 1770s. Well, Presbyterians love the Westminster Standards and church polity and whatnot, and that's occurring in this civil war between Parliament and Charles I. And there's, it's not as if Presbyterians alone are responsible for this. There are many more people and players involved in these wars, but Presbyterians are a major factor in it, and that's what I've tried to identify and follow through this book.
So, I think a lot of people forget that the idea of the Westminster Convention, that produced the Westminster Standards, that was supposed to be for the Church of England,
Right.
And it never really served that purpose. I mean, it served in Scotland, but it was in one sense, it was a failed effort and a failed document if you're looking at the realm of England, which is where it was supposed to be the law of the land, and that never came to be. I'm listening to about a 30-hour long book on the 30 Years' War and the inception of the Bishops' War, and then into the English Civil War that you mentioned. That took the English out of the 30 Years' War. They were sort of meddling, and they would sometimes help the Dutch, but not as much as the Dutch wanted. They would sometimes help the Palatinate, but not as much as they wanted. And of course, they really wanted to undermine the Spanish, and they were just out of it then. I mean, they were out of that war, which was good, but it changed a lot of things when they got sucked into their own problems rather than everyone else's.
Right. And so that is one of the ironies of Presbyterianism, that Presbyterians generally, and I know certain professor used to be at Westminster Seminary, sort of took John Meether and me to task for this not showing as much attention to English Presbyterians as we did to Scottish Presbyterians. I still think there's some justification for not paying as much attention to the English because they never achieved a General Assembly in England. The closest they came to it was the Westminster Assembly, which was an assembly called by Parliament. But in Scotland, you have, with the Scottish Reformation in 1560, you do have the rudiments of a General Assembly already laid out there in 1560. You have the first book of discipline, I think it's 1567, and then a second 1572. And those are the bones of Presbyterian church polity that Presbyterians throughout the Anglo world still follow. And there's nothing comparable to that in the English Presbyterian world, although, and this is the irony, if you want to think about the Westminster Confession and catechisms as Scottish, you're wrong. They're English products through and through. Of course, there were Scottish commissioners at the Westminster Assembly.
Yeah, they were influential, but there was a very small number on them of them. Right. They weren't 10%. They weren't even that much.
So, I mean, American Presbyterians generally get our polity from Scotland, but we get our theology from England.
So, if someone said, compare the Presbyterians in the middle of the 17th century with the Puritans, did they speak all the same language and have all the same concerns, or were those Puritans some were nonconformists, some were still in Church of England pulpits, some were in small kind of nonconformist denominations? I don't think the Presbyterians and the Puritans per se always saw eye to eye, did they?
No, they didn't. And I mean, Puritanism is a really tricky word. It may be more coherent in the New World, especially in New England, although there's a fair amount of variety there sometimes as well. But in the middle of the 17th century, you have people who are Puritan, everyone from John Milton, who is kind of like borderline deist maybe by the end of his life, and then John Owen, who is, rock-ribbed Calvinist, and there's still debates about whether he could have been a Presbyterian or not. But the word Puritans somehow covers that whole spectrum, and I don't entirely understand English church history sufficiently to know why there's that kind of fluidity as much in England and not as much in Scotland. But that is the case, and so I get very nervous about trying to define what Puritanism is.
Well, I think
in the old world.
I think they gave their life for the sake of a 20th century publishing industry. Actually, I mean, there are more books by and about the Puritans than there ever were Puritans, if you think about it.
No, and that, I mean, this is all parenthetical and somewhat unrelated, but because I have another book coming out later this year, God willing, on the history of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, I've become much more aware of historic preservation and efforts sort of beginning with the Mount Vernon Ladies Association to preserve and maintain Mount Vernon, of course, Washington's home and plantation. But one thing that happens in the late 19th century in America, I mean, Americans really didn't have a sense of preserving historic buildings until about 1850s and beyond. So the house where Thomas Jefferson lived in Philadelphia when he was writing the Declaration, that was razed in the first decade of the 19th century, roughly. But Franklin's home was also razed by his family and made room for a new set of buildings there. Even Independence Hall was used, the basement was used as the dog pound by the city of Philadelphia all the way until the 1850s. There was no kind of sense of reverence for these buildings.
No, there was no cat pound, though. They just didn't.
No. But what happens with historic preservation movements in the late 19th century is also a revival of colonialism. And so these female authors who write books about colonial New England, there's even one of the authors whose name I keep forgetting, writes a whole book about the Sabbath among the Puritans. This is the late 19th century. And of course, this is before Chortles. There is this outpouring of scholarship in the 20th century about Puritans. And I still haven't yet maybe connected the dots between the two. But you're right, Puritanism emerges as this huge thing in the 20th century of scholarly endeavor, even though you have these major historic sites in Virginia like Mount Vernon or colonial Williamsburg that attract all sorts of money for historic preservation purposes. And I don't think New Englanders get as much money like that for whatever reason. They get all the books, I guess.
Nate, any questions or observations to this point? I'm sure you want to ask Dr. Hart where he got his beautiful maize sweater. But besides that,
that was not on my list of beautiful questions to ask. Now, I do have a question but maybe it's later when we get further down, just about Presbyterian history in America, but nothing specific at this point. But we could jump there if we want.
Well, go ahead and ask. Because most people will only listen to half the podcast, so you can squeak in here on the first half.
Yeah. One question I'm wondering about is if your book touches on the influence of revivalism, First Great Awakening, with respect to how that influenced Presbyterians and crossover with other traditions, and how that may have had some kind of political impact. If Presbyterians are interacting with other traditions, you think George Whitefield, then is that opening them up to more political aspects in what they're doing? So I don't know if revivalism had an influence for them.
I don't think it did, but there is a chapter in the second part of the book, and this was something that I was surprised by, which is debates over subscription and the number of Presbyterian churches in Ireland, America, Canada. It doesn't exist yet. Some Scots who are resistant to subscription, even though the Church of Scotland actually does have a fairly strong view of subscription for officers in the church. But early 18th century Presbyterians in many quarters, even relatively conservative ones seemingly, and this is around the time of the Awakenings, are abandoning subscription. And part of it is a reaction against the state church imposing beliefs on the church. And so there are all sorts of resonances in the book, as you might imagine, for current debates about Christian nationalism and what the appropriate role of the government or civil magistrate might be. But in the 18th century, early 18th century, Presbyterians were saying, enough of that religion and politics, established church stuff. No, we don't want that, even to the point where we're going to give up on subscription and just kind of wing it, as it were. And that leads to kinds of liberalism in Ireland, but it also feeds into revivals in America. But the Awakenings themselves were not as politically charged as these other debates about established church, the covenants with the king, with the crown, and even the ideal running through all this too, running back to Calvin's Geneva, of a godly society. How do we get a godly society? And one of the ways that the Scots come up with that is to have this covenant between king, parliament, church, and the people. And the Presbyterians don't give up on advocating for godly societies, but they eventually do give up on a Christian government and also on an established church. They find other ways to do it.
So that dynamic of it's a normal fallen human tendency to react against imposition. You know, if you tell a kid not to do something, they're probably that much more likely to do it.
Right.
And that's just the way things work. And we have people in the PCA who don't want. And of course, we're the only Presbyterian denomination that doesn't have a binding book of worship, directory for worship, and we have people who don't want to be told what to do when it comes to worship, and I think, you know, to their and our detriment. But I think that's one of the things, like today, when we see Pete Hegseth having worship services and Donald Trump with his so-called, yeah. Well, no, I think given a choice between the Easter Bunny and Pastor, air quotes, Paula White, I think I'm going to take the Easter Bunny at this point.
Exactly.
But
especially if Melania's nearby. Anyway.
But I don't want to sound like an evangelical who thinks that the most important thing, you remember the 70s, Daryl, we want people to like us and then they'll like Jesus. But we also don't want to we don't want to make ourselves so noxious that we're a terrible advertisement for the gospel. And there's a dynamic in our country today that if Donald Trump and friends are for it, other people are going to be violently against it. And I'm sure that's through history. Sometimes when the monarch or the powerful adopt something, some people dislike it just because they've adopted it. And it's just you open a can of worms when you lash yourself to the masts of a leader or a movement, and you bring your religion along with you.
Right.
It seems to me. So it's and then we've got the social media culture, which is, it's all about the likes and the dopamine hits that you get from that, and the fairly low level of discourse. I continue to say, X is not for discourse. It's just to express yourself, but it becomes quite a thing. And I know you're old. You're probably 10
The
years
problem with
old.
expressing themselves is that people keep doing it.
Yeah, the mute button, like my wife picks up the TV remote and she points it at me and she hits mute, and it doesn't work. So it doesn't work for anyone today. Everybody has a voice, including what we always say, four white guys on a podcast, and here we are again.
Yeah, you could even have somebody get on Twitter and talk about fire sauce from Taco Bell, of all things. And
that was a better use of it. Yeah, that was a better use of it. So
I got a question here, Daryl, about Machen warrior idea. Maybe linking these kind of things together here, but wondering if your introduction ties in about how Presbyterians are kind of setting off the fires for the American Revolution, or at least that's the narrative that seems to be there. Is Machen warrior children kind of a bound up in the nature of Presbyterianism, and that's what makes us so cantankerous throughout history with respect to civil governments and imposition, or is that just something that flowered with Machen in his time?
No, I think that there is and Presbyterians today, whether it be, in my beginning of my career, the New Life Presbyterians were quite prominent. They seem to have subsided, and I think maybe Tim Keller took up a lot of that oxygen, even though he came out of New Life Presbyterian congregation in Philadelphia when he was at Westminster.
Well, the New Life OPC all joined the PCA, right?
Right. Majority did. But
which is why you're Old Life. That's the genesis
right.
of
Exactly.
the name. Yeah.
But that level of Presbyterian wanting to be evangelical is the way I'd put it. Wanted to be nice, didn't want to be mean, and I put John Frame in that category as well. And what that side of or version of Presbyterianism forgets is that Calvin was an ornery SOB. Knox was an ornery SOB. The Presbyterians in the 16th and 17th centuries were always complaining and arguing and fighting, at least with words, if not more. And I mean, it does moderate. Presbyterians do moderate politically by the 18th and 19th centuries, but Presbyterians are always arguing with other Protestant groups and also Roman Catholics. So
is that because we just have more doctrine, and also, I mean, we can't forget what radicalized Machen in 1920 at his first General Assembly. It was the plan of organic union. It was the idea to make a Protestant nationalist, to be honest, and because the mainline churches were Christian nationalists, to make a super church for the good of the country, modeled on the success that they had working to aid the war effort in World War I. Of course, that effort headed by, was it Erdman or was it Stevenson?
Right, Stevenson.
Yeah. And they were drunk on their own success. And but Machen was precise about doctrine, certainly, but more than most people realize about ecclesiology. Presbyterians, most really want to be Presbyterians, and they don't see church union and much ecumenism and even some fairly simple ways of working together as being a good idea. They believe in the slippery slope, and they believe in total depravity. And so what you're saying is this has always been the case.
Right. And it's I guess partly because also going back to the origins of the Scottish Reformation in the 1560s and the rise of Puritanism in the Church of England in the 1570s, but Presbyterians are part of that mix. This is, what historians call the Second Reformation. And this, the First Reformation, Luther and Calvin's kind of gets basics, but these Second Reformation types want to extend it farther and to purify the church, hence the word Puritan. And Presbyterians are very much interested in not merely reforming the doctrine or the worship, but also the polity of the church. And so we're trying to get maybe not a pure church, but a fully reformed church. That's what Presbyterians have always been about, at least going back to the 16th century, the origins. And then other groups of Presbyterians sort of get tired of that. Oh, the fight's too long, too much. Can't we just get along? And so we'll make compromises on certain things with either other kinds of Protestants or even within our own fold, and not draw the lines the way Presbyterians had in the past.
With the Congregationalists in the U.S., the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians, what was it, in the early 1800s were almost, just pulpit swaps and they were interchangeable, kind of
Right.
like some of the mainline churches are now. But that was not tenable for a lot of convinced and committed Presbyterians.
And this is where, I mean, I think a theme in my book is concerns that Presbyterian warrior children's side, of whom Machen is part, but eventually people say, okay, well, we can't fight about the politics. We're going to give up perhaps on the covenant, the national covenant, and having a covenanted government and whatnot. We'll just have a reformed church, and we'll kind of live within a government that isn't reformed the way we originally thought it was going to be. And there's a kind of moderation at that level that occurs in the 18th and 19th centuries. And actually, that's the part of Presbyterianism that's behind the American Revolution, really. The people like Witherspoon and Francis Allison, who I cover somewhat in the book, they were very much more moderate than the Covenanters had been. And I have lots of respect for the Covenanters, but I also think they were kind of crazy, especially by modern standards, that what they wanted for a reformed church and a reformed society was almost impossible. I mean, it was almost utopian, if not millennial. It certainly was millennial. And, I think it's valuable that Presbyterianism lost that side of things, even though I have respect for the Covenanters, the RPC, NA that we have here in the United States, or even there are whiffs of the covenant among the associate Reformed that I'm sure our friend in South Carolina will tell us about. And if you want an authentic Presbyterian nationalism, you want to go to the Covenanters for it. And everyone else is LARPing. All other Presbyterians are LARPing. The Covenanters are the real deal, and they have a snowball's chance in Hades of ever trying to get back the national covenant.
Well, what are there 15, 20,000 RPCNA members in the country? But what I've been told, I mean, they have a wacko every now and then, and they excommunicated one recently. But that's not been a fixture of their spirituality,
Right.
or their emphasis over the years.
Right.
So I think they have the gift of realism and have some a balanced perspective on the actual world. So that's one of my things with. We've talked about this before, I'm sure, but it's to make certain forms of nationalism, Christian nationalism, work. What you really need is a time machine. You just need to go back and see how it works. We do live where we live. I mean, yes, the state of our society and our government, and our government now, and our government 3 years ago, and probably our government in 3 years from now, going to be almost equally degenerate. We have a lot of problems. Immigration has caused problems. Certainly, a homogenous society would be easier to manage in some ways, but we have what we have. And my position is if you're a churchman, a pastor, a church officer, you can't lead with all that stuff. It just doesn't. It doesn't. Like Machen said, bringing the warfare of the world into the church. That's not our mission. But we have a lot of church people today who make a lot of this and seem to think it's necessary for the advance of the gospel and the health of the church. So did people believe they had to have the help of the magistrate in previous Presbyterian previous Presbyterian centuries, the 17th and 18th? I mean, they didn't know anything but monarchy, right? I mean, that was the air that they breathed and the water that they swam in. But did they think they had to have that help to be, quote, successful and faithful?
Well, I would say that they thought they did, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries. And then they saw how even a monarchy that had subscribed the national covenants, how that played out. And then I think some were still committed and like, no, you guys said it, you took the oath, you've got to do this. They're saying that even in the 1680s in Scotland. No, this is in the law. No, you're required to do this. They're kind of being originalists about it. But other people are saying that might have been a mistake to put that much trust in the monarchy. And if we can at least get an established church out of it, which is what Church of Scotland becomes, we'll live with that. And then the Church of Scotland, I mean, is one of the most moderate / liberal communions in the Presbyterian world in the 18th century. Even then, after, the Covenanters were always committed to the monarchy. It's only the Americans, of all the groups that I cover, the Canadians, the Irish, the Americans, the English, and the Scots, it's only the Americans who actually think, well, wait, we don't need a monarch. Maybe we can try this republic thing. And of course, that it's not as if they've all of a sudden discovered republics as the best form of government, but they do see the problems with a monarchy. And, they're certainly interested in first the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution with this checks and balances form of government. And also what came with that was a fair degree of religious liberty, first for Protestants and then for more. And so it's a gradual evolution. When you said earlier, Chortle's Presbyterian's Progress, I think might have been the title. I mean, I wondered if you were hinting at that kind of evolution of Presbyterians who lose their hardcore political convictions, but then still try to hold on to their hardcore religious ones. And that plays
exactly.
out.
Yes.
Yeah, that plays out over the 18th and 19th centuries in particular. Some of the viewers, listeners wanted a cat appearance. So here's little Chessie. She's actually huge. She's 11 pounds.
Yeah,
she's 11 months and 11 pounds. She weighs a ton. Sheesh. But she's great.
We got the cat. All cats are Anabaptists, I think, at heart. Wouldn't you think?
I don't know.
So
they're more Roman Catholic at heart.
How
well,
so?
nine lives, I guess. Well, I don't know. You mean having one as purgatory? Is that what you mean?
They're like the Pope. They think they rule over everything, and they might kill you if you step on the wrong side.
Every cat a pope. Every cat a pope. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You make mention of a French connection. Is that has to do with the experience of the Huguenots?
No, it's more just Calvin and
okay.
what Calvin was up to in Geneva. I mean, there is some. Actually, there's the sources that I use anyway. There's not a lot of interaction between English and or Scots with the French. It's much more with Geneva, whether it's Calvin or Beza. There is some advice coming from Zurich as well, but that's really only at the beginning. The English and the Scots really do marshal some great arguments in defense of Presbyterianism. And one book that I'd like to do after this one is a collection of primary sources and include the debates between Presbyterians and Anglicans, especially over the church history, the first 3 centuries. What was the nature of church government? Because it's hard to find episcopacy in the New Testament itself. What you have there are councils and elders and pastors. You have several offices there that look a lot like Presbyterianism. But then people would say, well, once the church developed, there was a need, a recognition for bishops. And then especially that really kicks in with conversion of Constantine. But Anglicans and Presbyterians have great debates over church history, the first 3 centuries, what the nature of church government looked like. And it's all, it doesn't necessarily settle any of the debates. Okay, they did it this way in the 2nd century. We don't have to do it that way now. We're bound by the Bible, what the Bible teaches. But still, those debates are pretty amazing. And it does get into this odd way in which church government evolved during the early church from a pattern that would have been much more conciliar or presbyterial to one that was much more episcopal. And what Presbyterians, beginning with at least John Calvin, are doing is trying to recover that rule by councils, that rule by assemblies.
Don't you think that governments, whether it's a king or you have a president or whatever, they'd rather deal with an episcopal system. They'd rather deal with people or one person than with a like you said, a crotchety, cranky, unpredictable, unsettled synod or denomination or presbytery. I think government, if it's going to interact with religion, wants to deal with people. I mean, there was a story I just saw this evening that apparently one of not Hegseth, but an undersecretary of defense summoned the Vatican ambassador recently and threatened. The word was threatened him over the Pope's kind of condemnation of the. It was not a condemnation specifically of the conflict in Iran, but it was a rebuke. Who would they rebuke if the PCUSA had said the same thing, as if they have any power anymore, or if the Presbyterian Church in America had issued a statement on this, which we don't have any mechanism to do outside of our assembly. I think governments like episcopacy, and in any sort of, I think an established government would, an established religion would tend to be episcopal some way or another.
Well, there's also part of it too is the history of the medieval and early modern church, where, and you even see this happening today in the case of the Roman Catholic Church in China and the concordat that Francis worked out with the Chinese authorities, 10 years or so ago. But, the kings would like to control the bishops and the diocese in some way, because there conceivably could be revenue, but also the bishops do a lot of work for civil society. They count, they baptize babies, so they count the population. When people die, they're buried, etc. It's kind of like the census of the society. But there's much more that bishops do, and kings having some say in who's going to be the bishops, especially in the cities where the crown is residing, is a big deal. And when either the English or the Scottish monarchs come along in the 16th, 17th centuries and then think about, wait, we're going to have to deal with an assembly of pastors and elders. What's that all about? I mean, maybe we could have a council of bishops we could deal with a little bit, but there's just something in their, set of expectations that, no, we can work with bishops because that's been going on for 1,000 years or more. And this thing of councils and assemblies, we just don't know what that is.
Yeah, I mean, no constitutional monarch wants to deal with the assembly, with the the House of Commons and the House of Lords. They want to do what they want to do, presidents certainly don't get along with the Congress very well. So but they love to deal with the leaders of the parties. They love to deal with their own underlings and appointees who are department heads. So there's just something about sovereigns and monarchs and pseudo monarchs that wants to deal with something sort of like them.
Right. Right.
So let's talk about establishmentarianism. I mean, arguably, the Westminster Standards, until revised by in the USA, 1788-89, would support an established state church. Let's talk about the range, the different types of established churches, and sort of the. There's never been an established in the United States. We had established religions, denominations in several states: Congregationalist, Anglican, and was there another one?
No, I mean the Quakers ran Pennsylvania, but
Right.
that was still.
But they weren't established.
Right.
But there was never a state in this union that had an established Presbyterian church. Yet today, in 2026, the only people asking for establishment, besides the Roman Catholic integralists, are Presbyterians. And of course, there's hard establishment, there's soft establishment, there's de facto establishment. There's the general. Let's have the government promote and enforce or prefer Nicene orthodoxy, which doesn't do anything with Rome. What's the range of what's this? I mean, you and I grew up. We never heard anything about anyone wanting an established church in this country. Now it's all over the place, it seems to be at least a vague goal for some people.
Well, I don't know if people remember this, but there was no established Presbyterian church in England. There was no established Presbyterian church in Ireland. There was no established Presbyterian church in America. Where you did have an established church, obviously, was Scotland, but it took until 1690, and it took until the Glorious Revolution for that finally to take hold, after 130 years of trying to reform the Church of Scotland. And the only other place where it kind of gets dicey, and this is also another fascinating part of the book, but in Canada, and Americans never think about Canada except when, Olympics or whatever, but
Curling.
But the British colonies in Canada. Okay, so they're British colonies. That means you have churches going over there and setting up shop. You have the Scots in all their varieties. You have Covenanters, Church of Scotland, and Associate Reformed going over. And then eventually the Free Church also emerges in 1843. So you have four varieties of Scottish Presbyterians. And then you have the Anglicans. And they're all in this colonial environment. And all of those churches are saying, in effect, oh, no, we're the established church, because they are the established church back in the old world. And so there are these clergy reserved lands that are a way for the government to subsidize ministers in Canada. And they work out allocation systems so that Anglicans get so much, Presbyterians get so much, and the disestablished Presbyterians from Scotland, like the Covenanters, the Associate Reformed, they try to get in on this by saying, oh, no, we're really like the Church of Scotland. We should get a cut of this money as well. So in Scotland and Canada, you have two varieties of Presbyterian establishment. But everywhere else in the Anglo world, Presbyterians are not established. And, I mean, you could argue that they did okay without the establishment, and that the establishment was not necessarily a positive development in Scotland or Canada.
I think this is important. What's the longest period that an established Presbyterian church anywhere in the world remained Orthodox? If you look at this, I mean,
I would say 20 years in Scotland.
Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of the point.
And that's being generous, I think, because I think even from the get-go, Church of Scotland in the 1690s was already in its moderate phase, very much influenced by the Scottish Enlightenment, or beginning to be influenced by it. And in many respects, that's a great thing. I have great respect for the Scottish Enlightenment, for Hume and those authors. But you don't necessarily want that teaching in your churches. In the universities, civil society, that could be a very fine thing, but maybe not so much for the church.
Well, I've had another scholar of the Presbyterian tradition tell me that he thought that establishmentarianism, or even probably even privileging of a given tradition in a country was probably the surest path to unfaithfulness. It just adds a dynamic, it seems to me, that is just untenable. We can't handle it. We can't handle being the thing, and we're not politicians, and they're going to eat our lunch. If we begin to owe them things, there's an author who wrote a book on Christian nationalism, and he puts forth the idea that the prince, which is shorthand for the magistrate, although he makes much of the single person, could build seminaries and churches and pay ministers. I think we all know the problems that have come from state-funded ministers in Scotland, and in or even if you were beholden to the laird, to the local landowner, he was picking the pastor. He was calling the shots. So if you're in bed with someone or dependent on them financially, eventually they are going to call the tune, and that's a tough place to be as a Presbyterian. But some people today think they can handle it this time. We can make it work.
And this is where, in my interactions with James Baird, and in my review of his book, I don't think that he really appreciates the point as much as he should, which is that the demographics of a society are really important for thinking about a Christian government or an established church, such that you could have an established church, which Scotland and England, in effect, still do, but they are having to minister to Muslims. I mean, they're ministering to a diverse set of people. It's not merely that there are Anglicans in England and Presbyterians in Scotland, because those societies opened up to immigration, and they opened up for non-Presbyterians and non-Anglicans to practice their faith. And so, but they're still the established church. They're the church of that realm, and therefore they have to provide religious services for everyone in it, which means they're providing religious services for non-Presbyterians. Now, if you want to have, the URC has, and CRC used to have, maybe still do, have confessional church membership, meaning to join a church in the Dutch Reformed tradition, you needed subscribe the three forms of unity. Presbyterians have not had that. But if you wanted to have confessional citizenship, so that anyone who's going to be a citizen of this society has to subscribe to Westminster Standards, and then you want to talk about a Presbyterian government and a Presbyterian established church, okay, maybe you've got something. But then what you've got is really the church. You don't have separation of church and state. You don't have civil society. You have a Presbyterian church. And that's, in some ways, that's what Puritan New England was. That was very much a church-based society. Yes, they recognized differences between the civil government and the church pastors, but in some ways, to be a member of the Puritan migration, you needed to be a member of the churches, and they were replanting whole congregations in the New World, and of course, that also didn't last either, because they had, at least, even if they were keeping certain groups out, they tried to keep Lutherans out, they tried to keep Baptists out, they tried to keep Quakers out, they tried to keep Presbyterians out, but eventually they came upon the problem of the second generation and the halfway covenant. Okay, we have people who were baptized, but they haven't made profession of faith, and now those people are having children, and they want their children to be baptized. What do we do? And if to be baptized member of a church is the condition for being a citizen in the society, man, you've got a whole set of problems.
I mean, the temptation to placate and moderate and accommodate, you can't get away from it. You become a civil entity. I mean, I think one of the reasons when I started hearing about Christian nationalism and when William Wolfe said cultural Christianity is enough for us to take the country over, to change the country, I knew that wasn't right because I've lived under it. If you've lived in a small town or a small rural county in the South, we have that. We have a semi-established church. It's called the Southern Baptist Convention, and nearly everyone's a Baptist. Everyone's walked the aisle 3 or 4 times. Everybody would say that they're a Christian, but we have about the same levels of drug use, teen pregnancy, divorce, crime. I've lived under a Christian government in the county that I used to live in, and it was just about rotten to the core. So my shields are up when I hear that I've been hearing we're going to take this country back at church. Not recently, but I grew up hearing that, and you probably grew up hearing the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not with the same fervor because you weren't in the South. But the Southern Baptists were cultural transformationalists in the way that independent fundamental Baptists maybe never were. But I've heard it all before. I heard it in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. So I'm skeptical. But maybe I'm just a cantankerous person. Maybe I'm not hopeful enough.
Well,
Nate, you've never lived in that environment, have you? I mean,
you don't know the
give us the story.
The Southern California version of that is
Orange County.
Orange County.
Yeah,
it's thick there. I grew up with that for sure, and I mean, it was. There was definitely the white nationalist element at the megachurch I grew up at, and if you were not, a part of that contingent, you were not wanted, and it was pretty surprising the pushback that the church I grew up at when they were going to start a Hispanic ministry there, how strong the aversion was to try and do that. I mean, they did, and I think the majority of people were, but there was a large contingent that were, we don't want that. We don't want to do this. And You had the we're going to move to Idaho. It's a much more popular thing in Southern California than it is. And that was going back since, I can remember all the way to being a kid when, by the time Y2K hits.
It's the American Redoubt. The American Redoubt.
Idaho is just Southern California north, and Arizona is just Southern California east at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
So did the Orange Countyans did they fix Southern California, Nate? Pretty much.
These days they're actually keeping it together somewhat. San Diego is.
Microphones are dead here. That's what happens when you have 6-year-old microphones. Orange County, I think, is actually keeping it together for much of Southern California right now. And if it weren't for them, that would be a San Francisco, but from Santa Barbara down to Mexico. Resby and I have talked about this in the past too, about the Latino culture. I think also helps to make it conservative because they're so family oriented. And you go to any park on a Saturday or Sunday, you drive by it, and there is large Latino gatherings there.
There's a surprising number of, even taco shops and restaurants in San Diego County and parts of the city you wouldn't expect that, may have red hats with white letters on, sitting on top of a stove or something like that. I mean,
man's got to eat.
Yeah. Michael Jordan once said, Republicans buy sneakers too. So I'm with you, Nate. I think certain little enclaves like that, I think the further east you go as well, it probably becomes more true. But the population density that we think of as Southern California may not necessarily impact it quite as much the further east you go. But we've talked about it before too. We've got California out of our systems a long time ago, but probably weekly. I think, man, I wonder if I could do it again.
So, Daryl, what did you learn in researching and writing this book? And is it going to be any good in the
just end the sentence right there? Is it
the current debates? Is it going to help or inflame or bring light and clarity? But what did you learn from it that you didn't know?
Well, I didn't know how threatening Presbyterian polity could be in a particular setting like England, with the king as the head of the church, and then eventually with Scotland, the merger of the crowns of England and Scotland. I mean, that is a recipe for real friction that keeps playing out for a good 130 years or more. And I hadn't really figured that out. And so I came to understand the importance of Presbyterian church government in ways that I hadn't. And, I listened to you, Presbycast. I listened Presbyterian Polity, the podcast, some. I listen to some other Presbyterian podcasts, and I hear a lot of discussion about, especially in the PCA, about the Book of Church Order and Directory for Worship. I think this book could at least supply some historical context for people thinking about Presbyterian polity and how it evolved. But
I wanted to ask you this. You're not so much going back to primary sources and documents and saying this is what they said and this is how it should be. You're also talking about what happened. I mean, what happened to the people who advocated for these things and how the events played out. Because I think we have some people today who live in sort of in a realm of ideals. This is how it should be. But I think your book is probably telling us how it actually worked out. and
Right.
what happened to the people who advocated these things and what they did.
Right. It's a history of church and state interactions over questions about reforming the church along Presbyterian grounds or not. But then it also goes beyond that to not just England and Scotland, but Ireland has its own important Presbyterian history, and a lot of American Presbyterians come out of Ireland. And then America and Canada have also their own sort of, different histories as colonial societies, and to think about how churches are planted there and then develop over time is another question. But you asked whether this is going to be inflammatory. I don't think it will be inflammatory. It wasn't written to be inflammatory. It was written to be a fair telling of a certain strand of history, Presbyterian history. And I actually think that, there's a chapter in the book called, I think, Presbyterian Nationalisms, and it's covers 19th century important figures in Scotland, England, Ireland, Canada, and the United States. And it really does develop ways in which these people, like Charles Hodge, are thinking about politics in their societies and the kind of policies that they're advocating or kind of politicians that they are supporting in the hopes of having a godly society. And in that sense, I think the Christian nationalists want a godly society. And there's a certain sense in which I do too, as long as I can still keep my Mac subscription and see The Wire. I'm sorry, I got to see The Wire. I really do think, I don't know how that's going to fit in that world, a godly society. But, I do think that those guys have a point, that even into the 19th century, the Christian nationalists have a point. Even in the 19th century, Presbyterians are thinking about how to have a Christian society, a godly society. They're not thinking, though, about having a Christian prince or a Christian magistrate or a Christian government, though. But still, that heartbeat of reforming church and society, which is very much a part of the Reformation, both the First Reformation and the Second Reformation, lingers on and takes certain forms that actually wind up at sometimes being sort of progressive. If you're a small government libertarian type, maybe you're not going to follow Charles Hodge all along the line of the measures that he's advocating. Especially, say, for instance, like temperance. Okay, I'll give up The Wire, but can I keep my drinks? Well, maybe you can't in a godly society, the way that some of these Presbyterians go.
So what's the there has to be, the most important society for Christians is the church. And there's always a tension between when you become very much about reforming society, sometimes the church takes a back seat. And sometimes a type of moral panic will cause you to lose some doctrinal distinctives or perspective. And when social reform becomes more important than the distinctives of Reformed theology and Presbyterian worship and government, that's a danger, it seems to me.
Yes, it is. If the Christian nationalists would come on board with not just blue laws, but actually having a morning and evening service, and if they come on board with singing the Psalter and not having praise bands or sway babes. By the way, I used that in the class last week, your phrase sway babes, Charles, and the students got a bit of a chuckle out of it, I think.
I don't really use it anymore.
It's a great phrase.
I've got a Discord server with, there are several females on there, and, I try not to inflame.
It's not inflammatory. It's amusing.
Yeah, I occasionally use it, but not like I used to.
Anyway, if those guys would come on board with those sorts of church reforms, that'd be great.
Yeah,
I might take it more seriously.
but that has nothing to do with the state.
Right.
You know, if the state, like in Stephen Wolf's book, he said, well, one of the things the Christian Prince could do is require central pulpit location. Now, nobody's a bigger advocate of a central pulpit than me, an elevated and central pulpit. My church has a pulpit that probably weighs 1,500 pounds. It's 7 feet wide. It's 4 feet off the ground. It's octagonal. I've never known which it is. I hauled it from Greenville, South Carolina, behind my 1997 Dodge Dakota on an 18-foot trailer that I use for my tractor with no brake in the rain. I risked my life to haul this pulpit, and it was a good it was 16 years ago or more. But I don't want the civil magistrate, the Christian, even if he's an ideal Christian prince, telling me where to put my pulpit or what kind I have to have. I also don't want the city, the state, or the federal government paying my pastor or building my church or controlling the seminary that my minister has to go to. There are some people who want that. And through looking at history, the history that you described from 1560 forward, and the Scottish Presbyterian tradition, the unrevised Westminster Standards, they think they can justify those things from those documents and that tradition. I have to take issue there. The spirituality of the church. It's got a bad name because the Southerners who espoused it seemed to be doing so to cover the sin of their support of slavery, things like that. But that's the spirituality of the church is a thing, and that chapter didn't get revised, I don't think, when we revised the confession, and I think we need to hold on to that.
Right. So the history is, it's instructive. It does, again, give ground to people who would say, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had a Christian society and a Christian government the way the reformers wanted. But the book will also show how badly that went. Not all the time, but a lot of the time, which would leave maybe Christian nationalists in this odd position of, well, it's never been really tried, just like the communists. It's never been really tried. We'll do it now. We'll do it now.
Yes, the conditions are ideal. I mean, Calvin was constant.
Do I dare make another reference to the Arrested Development scene? People delude themselves into thinking it'll work for them, but it never does. But it might work for us.
Conditions are ideal. I was
going to say it brings up a question that I have of, maybe to set the background to this a little bit. It's the larger question of like truly reformed, who's the TR and who has the tradition. And at least as I've navigated into this whole, history a bit, reading Stuart Robinson and then reading a little bit of the Hanover Presbytery stuff. What was enlightening to me in all this was that there is this strong contingent within Presbyterian on some level of not just we're not advocating for a Christian government per se, but we're actually showing a kind of the problem of having a Christian government or a specifically established Christian government. And the bigger thing is about, who's the true Presbyterian tradition here. And as it seems, I've looked at it, it's like, we're in the 2K, R2K, M2K, whatever adjective you want to put in front of 2K. But as I've followed this discussion for the past 15 or so years, it seems like we're this outset that has no links into history, into the Presbyterian tradition, and at least as I've been on my own doing some delving into that, it seems like, well, there's actually some roots here. And I don't know how much, Daryl, your book would actually contribute to helping clarify maybe the diversity that's there, or development of what Presbyterians are, on, showing we're not just all establishmentarians. There's actually a much more complex picture there than just, well, the Presbyterians were X, and therefore that's what we ought to be ourselves today.
So you refer to the Hanover Presbyterians in Virginia, right?
Yeah.
And then in New Jersey, there was some pretty, some documents from the New Jersey Presbyterians in the 1770s that were pretty telling as well. So it wasn't monolithic. But so Nate's question, but my question to you, Daryl, and I've never really written on this. I've tried. It's difficult. Is there value in religious liberty to Presbyterians? I mean, can we compete on an equal playing field? It seems to me when I read the New Testament, Paul's not asking much of the magistrate. Keep order, generally commend the good, and punish the evil. And that's just to set a stage for the church to operate and to continue and not be persecuted. Is there a value in that kind of limited government intervention and in liberty itself?
Heck yes. I mean, what are the alternatives to religious liberty? Religious persecution?
Yeah, no.
I mean, does anyone really want that? You could die. I mean, Francis Macamee, when he preached in New York and had to go to prison and then had the trial over religious liberty, there were provisions for people to worship in houses as conventicles, but that was it. So there are aspects to a religious establishment, and it is the case that Presbyterians in Ireland, America, and England were all dissenters, and they were suspicious of church establishments and also of the government. And at least the book will recognize that there are at least other ways of looking at established churches and Christian government, and that conservative Presbyterians have been suspicious of those things because they've been in the place of being dissenters. But I mean, I think maybe implicit in your question, Brad, is religious liberty good for, having Presbyterianism dominate somehow American society, or, other places as well? Will it lead to so many people becoming Presbyterian that, society will be changed? America has been a decent experiment in that. And I still think old school Presbyterianism, especially at Princeton in the 19th century, was about as high an accomplishment of Presbyterianism as has existed in history of Presbyterianism. And that was in a religious liberty setting. But Presbyterians didn't wind up dominating American society. We did pretty well in America in the 19th century. And then after the Civil War, and with the rise of progressivism and the social gospel and wanting to reform not only America, but the world, thanks to World War I and beyond, then Presbyterians really adopted a social gospel more than the real gospel. So, you could argue that Presbyterians became successful enough in echelons of power in the United States to really lose their witness. But prior to the Civil War, Presbyterians did pretty well with a system of religious liberty, but had to share space with Congregationalists, Methodists, Baptists, Anglicans, Quakers, Lutherans, the whole lot, Roman Catholics, and a small number of Jews.
Yeah, and arguably some of the movements we see today are right-wing social gospel. You
Right.
know, you got to have 12 kids. You got to do head covering. You know, the only way to save the country is to have a 15-passenger van load of babies. And I mean, it's a social gospel. I'm sorry, and ultimately, there's probably some theology of glory behind it all.
Right.
And I think you two, we have at least two OPC people on the call, and that whole pilgrim and stranger mentality and ethos is a thing. So that's why we find ourselves on the outs sometimes with at least the loud voices of popular opinion. Well, we've hit that magic hour and a half mark that we don't want to transgress too far. Anything you want to say, Doctor, on the way out about the book, or you going to have a lavish book tour with probably I'm envisioning a custom bus, sort of like rock bands used to use, maybe the use of a private jet, and some high-end locations where you're going to have stops on this book tour. Is that the way it works?
Probably not. But I guess in closing, I would say because it's the 250th of the American founding, and yes, because I've written this other book about Independence Hall, and I know a lot more now about the Continental Congress and the Revolutionary War than I did before. And I really think it's a great story. I think the American story is a great story. I think the American founding is a great founding. But I would say that the book does pay attention to, and I frame the book in a way that really is about whether the American Revolution was a Presbyterian rebellion or not. Even King George said it was. Presbyterians were in the English monarchs' heads. And in that sense, I think readers may be surprised about the way that Presbyterians came down in those debates about the American founding. It's not, I think it's maybe a tenth of the book, so it's not predominantly an American story, although there will be other surprises about other American Presbyterians who are in the book who have some really kind of odd views, and also some really encouraging views. So I would say, as much as I've talked here with you about England and Scotland, there is a fair amount about American Presbyterianism in the book that I think is worth considering in this hallowed year of our nation's history.
Well, we have what's called post-liberalism now, but I have in my hand a review of your book by an esteemed American Presbyterian scholar, and I think he quotes you as saying, the Presbyterian assertion of the Church's spiritual independence and its elaborate and sometimes baffling explanation of the spiritual and temporal spheres of Christ's rule were necessary features in building liberal politics. So you make the case in the book as well that the liberal, it's the classic definition that maybe there wouldn't be liberalism in society and in politics, meaning diversity and freedom of religion without the Presbyterian influence, and that's something you're going to find in the book as well.
Right, and we didn't talk about that, but that's a good quote, not because it's of me, but it is a reminder that Presbyterians, they weren't the only Christians that do this, but they so insisted on the spiritual nature of the church as opposed to the civil government and the temporal nature of that. And that's, that's the seed of separation of church and state that I do think is really important for working out liberal politics, both in Britain and also North America.
All right. So, Nate, any parting words? If anybody comes to Wisconsin, you'll give them some cheese. Is that right?
In cold weather.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
We had,
hopefully it's warming up now.
we had
All right.
ice this morning and 67 in the afternoon. So
Yeah, that's good for you. Yeah. Resby, any parting remarks, or you just want to tell everybody to get lost and wait till next time?
I think given the circumstances, I'm going to tell everyone to get lost. And just seems like the right thing to do. But always good to be back. I'm sorry that I've been unintentionally absent a couple times, but thanks to the content machine, it just keeps making itself. So we'll talk to you again next time, and please, Protestants and Patriots, don't be an Erdman.
Go to your college, you can go to your school if you ain't got Jesus, you've been educated for the that's all. That's all. And you gotta have. That's right.
What's wrong with you people?